In previous videos, I told you what Josephus had seen and described about Jerusalem. He was there in the 50s and 60s of the first century, and then in video number 11, I told you about the eyewitness account of two pilgrims dating as far back as the second decade of the 4th century. Now, in this video, I will tell you about a Roman historian from the 2nd century, what he has to say about the temple and the Jerusalem, as well as a way more interesting account of a Jewish civil servant who visited Jerusalem and the temple around 250 BC. And that is a very interesting and relevant account for our quest. And our quest still being the question, is this the temple or is this the fortress Antonia? Now let me go to the quote of Tacitus, because I was talking about him as the 2nd century Roman historian. And he is telling a few things about the city, Fortress Antonia, and the temple. An inner line of walls had been built around the palace, and on a conspicuous height stands Anthony's Tower, so named by Herod in honor of Mark Antony. Now the temple was built like a citadel with walls of its own, which were constructed with more care and effort than any of the rest. The very colonnades about the temple made a splendid defense. Now I leave it to you whether this description fits more this scenario or the other one. Is Antonia here built on a conspicuous height? Is the temple here and the defense of it dependent of the walls of the colonnades? I don't think so. But if we look at the other alternative, then this is indeed built on a conspicuous height, and the defense of the temple is indeed depending on the walls that were built around it to form the colonnade. But that is not the main item I was to draw the attention to. That is this sentence over here. Within the enclosure is an ever-flowing spring. In the hills are subterranean excavation with pools and cisterns for holding rainwater. Now, what he is doing here is he is associating within the enclosure, we are still talking about the temple, is an ever-flowing spring, so he is associating the ever-flowing spring with the area of the temple, and in the hills are subterranean excavation. Now, that is interesting, because he is so closely associating this Gihon spring with the temple, while he is mentioning about these subterranean cisterns. He is just telling them that they were beneath the hills. So this one he connects with the area of the temple, and this one he connects with the hills. Now I leave it to you whether this description of Gihon being part of the temple fits more to this scenario or to that scenario. In this case, the distance between the Gihon spring and the temple is about, 500, 600 meters. And in that one, to the walls of the area is about 100 meters. Now I'll go to the other side, which is way more interesting, and he is more or less okay, here. Now this is about this quote here, the first quote. I will give you two quotes, and this one is interesting as well. The temple faces the east and its back is towards the west. The whole of the floor is paved with stones and slopes down to the appointed places that water may conveyed to wash away the blood from the sacrifices, for many thousands beasts are sacrificed there on the feast days. And there is an inexhaustible supply of water, because an abundant natural spring gushes up from within the temple area. There are more wonderful and indescribable cisterns underground, and as they pointed out to me, at a distance of 5 furlongs all around the side of the temple, and each of them has countless pipes, so that the different streams converge together. And all these were fastened with lead at the bottom and at the side walls, and over them was a great quantity of plaster had been spread, and every part of that work had been most carefully carried out. There are many openings for water at the base of the altar, which are invisible to all except for those who are engaged in the ministration, so that all the blood of the sacrifices, which is collected in great quantities, is washed away in a twinkling of an eye. Such is my opinion with regards to the character of the reservoirs, and I will now show you how it was confirmed. They led me more than 4 furlongs outside the city, and bade me peer down towards a certain spot and listen to the noise that was made by the meeting of the waters, so that the great size of the reservoir became manifest to me, as has already been pointed out. Now, this is of course very interesting from this guy. This is from Aristeas, and Aristeas was a civil servant from King Ptolemy, who was sent on a mission to Jerusalem, to the high priest, to perform some kind of business, and I don't know what the business is, but it is not very important. And he was a pious Jew, so it's not hard to imagine that he considered this mission to be very, very interesting for him. It was his fatherland. And he did write an extensive journal on what he saw. Now, let us note that this is 250 BC, and Alexander the Great could have been an old man by that time if he hadn't been murdered. But what this guy is telling us, he also connects the Gihon spring with the temple. Now let us zoom in and let's discuss that. In this configuration, the temple is here, and the distance between the Gihon spring and this site here is 110 meters, and the height difference is 80 meters, so it is the Gihon spring is 80 meters below the temple surface area. And well, with this being the retaining wall, it is very easy to imagine stairs going down from the temple location here, either to the Gihon spring itself or to the tunnel of Hezekiah. That would be a staircase of 135 meters with an angle of 40 degrees. So that is doable. And it isn't a stretch to imagine that with such a staircase, one could state it, that there is a natural water source related to the temple area. And to be honest, it is hard to imagine that there wouldn't have been a stair from the temple down to such an important source of fresh water, which might be required for the high priest and the priests in general to have their purity, or what do you call it, they have to clean themselves before they perform their duty, and they need clean living water for that. So this description might fit to this situation, but it is very hard to imagine that being the case for this scenario here. You have the temple here, and the Gihon spring is still there, and it is quite a distance. More importantly is what he is telling about those cisterns, because he was quick to point out that this natural water spring here wasn't the source of the bulk of water that was being used on the sacrificial process. That water was coming from several cisterns within a kilometer range of the temple. Now we can have a look at the site surrounding this area. When we are looking at a kilometer distance, then this and this and this and this and this cisterns all are within a kilometer distance from the temple. And more importantly, most of them have a height high enough to supply water to the altar if the altar is on this location, because this one is those cisterns here beneath the hill. We're about 4, 5, 6 meters above the altar here. This one is about 20 meters or even more, 25 meters above, and this one is also 20 meters above the site of the altar. So with these cisterns here, you can have a water pressure here at the site of the altar of about 0.5 to 1.5 bar. But that ain't be the case with the altar being located on the top of the Temple Mount, because that is higher than the cisterns beneath this area, the cisterns in the hill, as well as above the most important cistern, which is located just west of the city. That is below the level of the altar on that location. So it is very difficult to imagine that an altar being placed on top of the mountain here can be supplied with water from not from this and not from this one and not even close from this. Maybe this one here was just high enough to have some water there delivered, but the pressure wasn't very high, can't be very high. So this made it very hard to imagine the temple being here in the description given by this guy Aristeas. Now, another devastating blow he is dealing us, or this Temple Mount theory, and that is here. When he had done his visiting, he went on a visiting tour around the city, and he is telling us very interesting things. But in order that we might gain complete information, we ascended the summit of the neighboring citadel and look around us. Now he is talking about a citadel overlooking the temple, which is neighboring. So we can be sure that he is talking either about the citadel of the Hasmoneans, which Josephus described several times, a citadel just north of the temple. So that citadel either being here or here, which Herod later turned into Fortress Antonia. He is describing that citadel. It is situated in a very lofty spot and is fortified with many towers. Well, the lofty spot is also an interesting aspect, because what is he meaning by that? And he is meaning that he has a nice look on the city. He is describing the city as a theater around it. That is a nice description from this point, because here he is looking towards a hill going upwards. So he is seeing the whole city here. He might be looking into the temple, he might be looking in the northern direction, but this one here is typically situated as a theater around this point. However, if we imagine him standing here, then that is a very strange way to describe the situation, because this northern part wasn't even built at that time, and probably this part either. I think that this wall here was not yet built in 250 BC. So he was looking at maybe some houses outside of the walls, but the city, well, that was this here. Maybe here the temple. So that is not a very lofty space. He was looking at an agricultural area, so to speak, and he was rather far away from the temple. Anyway, we continue the description. Lofty, many towers, which had been built on top of immense stones. We see objects, as we are informed, of guarding the temple to detect insurrection. Now, well, he describes the citadel the same way as Josephus did also, namely that this citadel was very important to guard the temple. On the towers of the citadel, engines of war were placed and different kinds of machines, and the position was much higher than the circle of walls which I mentioned. So again, we are confronted with a situation where those walls of Antonia are much higher than the walls of the temple, which is also true for this scenario, of course, because in this scenario we have also Antonia being higher than the cloisters of the temple. But here it comes. Even kijken. They were careful, command, sacrifice. Oh yeah. They were very reluctant to admit us, so we were but two unarmed men to view the offering of the sacrifices. Now, this guy is confirming what Josephus already told us as well, namely that he was able to have a look in the temple, and as I told you before, when Antonia would be here, then it is not possible at all to have a look in the temple. While on the other hand, if we imagine the other scenario, with this being Fortress Antonia, then we do have a possibility to look from here into the temple site. So what these guys are describing is a situation where they can look from their viewing point, from the citadel, into the temple. That is possible in this scenario and not in the other scenario. Now, by the way, I told you that according to Josephus, this citadel here was built by the Hasmoneans, namely, what was his name again? Hyrcanus I. But Hyrcanus I wasn't born at the time that this visitor was describing this citadel. So Josephus is mistaken that this citadel is older, the citadel is older and potentially way more old. And because those cisterns may have played a role from the beginning of the Second Temple, and potentially even from the beginning of the First Temple, the whole construction of the citadel on top of it might be much older. So I have to alter my expectation of a potential archaeological findings on this location, which I stated that I expected them to be Hasmonean, based on Josephus' remark that the citadel was built by Hyrcanus, but now I find out that this citadel might be much older. So I have to alter my expectations on that way. And anyway, the other aspect of the water flow from beneath the altar, I will come back on that as well in a future video, because my speculation on the pit that was located over here, maybe you remember, and that was kind of a speculation, but that can be upgraded maybe to an intelligent guessing. Now, thank you for listening.